Recording on, sharing on. Okay. So. Okay. So let's just kind of review before we get started on this PowerPoint. How's it going? We had a very active weekend. I was very busy grading over the holiday. Looks like everybody is on course. We've got just a few people that haven't turned anything in, but other than that, it looks like you've all got started. So I'm going to work this week on getting all the webinars installed on YouTube, and as I get them, I'll upload them on YouTube. And the reason I haven't done that in the past was because I want to make sure that you're following me and we're not getting confused. And now that I've heard from most everybody, I think the people I haven't heard from, there's a reason why I haven't heard from them. And everyone else I'm kind of following now. So I've pretty much heard from almost everybody. So that's a good sign. Some of what I've heard, there's some confusion, but that's why we're here. So now let's be very clear what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today, we're on chapter 5. We've covered chapter 4 last week. No one is at chapter 4. We have one person that should be working on it now, but no one has turned it in. One person has turned in homework and assignment 3 and did actually very well. And that's an undergraduate, actually, not a graduate student. So that's a good sign that everyone is understanding. And it looks like people are getting their resubmits in and are doing a better job. So that's good too. That's what we want. And now we're going to get we've talked a lot about, let's review what we've done. We spent the first kind of couple weeks on what is finance lingo, what is NPV, what is a discount rate, what is an IRR, what is a reinvestment rate. We spent a lot of time just thrashing around in that, and we were, some of us, a little confused, but we're getting there. And then we spent a little bit of time on kind of the overview of the different points of view. And chapter 4 spends a lot more time on the private point of view and really accounting lingo. So let's review some of that. An operating cost is a cost of actually implementing that project. So when you get, in fact, if you look at this slide here, you see the net benefit is the benefits of the choice. So if you buy a machine and it returns $30,000 in revenue and the costs of operating it are $10,000, the net benefit is $20,000. Some of us saw this word operating cost, and when the project is to buy a machine, that's the cost of operating the machine. So that's really the cost of that choice. So we're now also understanding that. We talked about depreciation. We talked about working capital. All of these are finance, or not finance terms, but accounting terms. And the reason why we're talking about them is because the people that are best able to drive a lot of projects are private business people. It is cheapest in our economy, and those of you who are in the graduate course will actually calculate how much it saves us if we have a private party undertake an investment. The reason why we like that is because they take all the risk and all we do is collect the taxes. So they benefit the community. We don't have to pay for it, and we get a tax benefit from the business when they make a profit. So we like that. Normally, government is to step in when businesses are not able to function. Like, for example, building roads, sometimes it just doesn't pay. Schools just doesn't pay. So if we had schools that we had to pay for, then we'd have a problem because not everybody can afford. So we really like to do public projects that are really not able to be done by the private, because when we do public projects, we lose because we don't get tax dollars. We also have to manage them. We know how well governments manage. Enough said on that. So the chapter 4 is really talking about accounting lingo. So operating cost, working capital, depreciation. Remember, what is depreciation? Depreciation is how much a particular asset, like a piece of equipment, machinery, a structure, land, how much it went down in value because you used it for a year trying to generate profits. When you buy a new car, you drive it off the lot, you drive it for a year, and it's not worth what you paid for it. It lost value. So we have to account for that, but we've already spent the cash. So this is just a way that accountants keep track of how the value of the asset decreases. We've already spent the money, and now we're going to write some of it off. So that's why we talked about it, because it's a not cash expense, but it affects the benefits to the owner, the private owner of the project. So now we are going to delve into economics, which is going to drive you probably the most crazy of everything. This is chapter 5. It's very confusing, and I'm going to go over it. I've kind of covered it before, but we're going to do it again. It's very confusing. So let me just be very clear here that economists assume that people are rational and we are trying to maximize net benefits. This is why we're doing NPV. This is why we're calculating net benefits. This is the basis for taking a positive NPV, which means the benefits outweigh the costs. This is what we're really geared to do. So we're not geared to take losses. When we're having a loss, we need to figure out, why would we do this? That's why if you look at your college example and you're saying, well, geez, I didn't make my discount rate. Is this still a good investment? You need to explain why it is still a good investment if it has a negative NPV. Or you need to say, I am willing to accept a lower return. And I can still tell myself I'm being rational. Because it doesn't make sense to accept a lower return for no reason. Because you will get to the end of the day and go, wow, I don't have any money to retire because I kept compromising. I kept taking less than I wanted or less than I needed. So we're trying to avoid that. We're really trying to explain, if this NPV is negative, why might this still make sense? Sometimes it does make sense. Sometimes it just makes me so unhappy to do that type of thing. I just loved college so much, I would never give it up. Or maybe my estimates are wrong, or maybe I could find a cheaper college that would give me the same non-market benefits, something. So that's why we're talking about this. Because you may still want to do a project that doesn't have a positive NPV, and how might we deal with that? Maybe we could sacrifice a little bit of a return, the discount rate, because it makes us feel so great. I'm willing to give up some profits or some returns. I'm willing to work for a lower wage rate because I just love the job. We all say that, but I just wanted to know how much you're sacrificing if you're taking below a 0 NPV. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to deal with this assumption that we're rational, and if we don't maximize benefits, why? You need to explain this away, because otherwise we're looking irrational because we're taking losses. People do it, and what I'm suggesting is, if you're going to do it, you better be clear why you're doing it and be very clear that you are doing it. Okay, so again, we're really looking at acquisition costs. There's money prices and there's non-monetary sacrifices. This is what we've all got to look at when we're looking at projects. Because when you buy into a project, it comes as a whole batch. You don't just get to pick the positive parts. You may like this part, but not that part. And I'm sure all of us would agree, we love development and we hate it at the same time. Am I the only one that complains about not having Kailua Drive-In anymore, or all these houses everywhere? And I used to ride my bike over here and now there's houses. But if we don't have houses, then where are we going to live? So we got to constantly deal with this. And I think we all kind of like to have our cake and eat it too, but that's not how it goes. Most of us would like development for ourselves, but not for anyone else. That's funny how that goes, but that's what happens. Okay, so let's now, one more time now, we're going to review economics. So the first kind of basic assumption in economics is that we want to figure out what society wants, who gets what we produce, what is society going to produce, for whom, and how much of it. So it all starts in economics with the consumers. What do these consumers want? Because if they don't want it, if we're throwing it away, we're throwing away food, then we should not have produced that food in the first place. If we're throwing away stuff, we should not produce that stuff in the first place. So that's what we need to worry about. So initially, this whole economic story starts with demand. So we have demand, and it looks always like this. As the price goes up, we want less of it. That's just how it always looks. The law of demand says so. That's what it is. And so what that means is that demand curves slope downward to the right. And so it looks like this. It slopes downward to the right. And this whole curve is demand. This point right here is the quantity demanded at this price. So we all make a decision every day how much we're going to buy, and it's really a function of that price and a few other things. But when you get to the market, you've got it down that you need to buy fruit, and you're going to make your decisions partially based on the price. And if apples become half as expensive, are you going to buy twice as many? That's what this demand curve says. There are some of us that will buy the same amount. Like some of us will eat the same breakfast every day, the same cup of coffee every morning, and we will not really respond much to the price. Others of us are much more price sensitive, and it also depends on the good in question. If it's an expensive good, then we're going to be much more responsive. Consuming expensive cars is very, very price elastic. Although, let me say, luxury cars are becoming cheaper. So if you want a Ferrari or a Bugatti, now's the time. They're becoming relatively cheaper to a Lexus. So, which I was surprised to hear, but that's true. So anyway, we have these demand curves. This is what we're willing to pay for things. It's not how much we're going to pay, it's what we're willing to pay. So if we're up here, we're willing to pay quite a bit. If we're down here, we really are not as interested in paying so much. So we all have this idea. And once we fix a price, if this is the price, you go into the store and this is the price, and I was willing to buy it up here, then I really kind of got a bargain. So this is what we call consumer surplus. Some of us are willing to buy up here, but we walk into the store and it's only this much, so we get what we call a surplus because we paid less for it than we were willing to pay. And we see that this is nice, although most of us say, well, when you're rich, of course, then you get all these benefits. My feeling is, if it's something you really want and are willing to pay for, then you want to signal that to the producers in the world that you really want this, and you want to give that economic signal out. And that's really what demand curves do, is they give out economic signals about how we value things. Because we've got all this stuff we can produce. We got all these projects we can do. But which ones do we value the most? Which goods and services that those projects will produce will be most important to us? That's really what we want to identify, and that's why we're interested in these market prices. And the demand curve gives us our values for various amounts of this good or service, and that's really what we're interested in. How important is this to the world? This helps us figure out the benefits of the project that produces these goods and services. So that's a demand curve, and that's what consumer surplus is. It's the difference between the price we paid and the more that we were willing to pay. So you don't get it down here. These people were only willing to pay this much. What happens to them if the price is P1? They don't get it. They don't buy it. This is why we don't like markets. Remember me saying we needed allocation mechanisms. Who gets what? If we use price, if you're down here, you don't get it. And what do you become? A complainer. Because you don't get what you want. Everybody complains when they don't get what they want. That's accepted. Not everybody will get everything they want. That's also accepted. We don't have enough to go around. So we accept that some people will be unhappy. We may still want to do something about that, but we won't do it in a marketplace. We'll do it using another type of allocation mechanism. And we talked about those. First come, first serve, based on need, We do have a lot of need-based. So if they need it, we have programs for need, government programs to deal with the people down here who can't afford it. Okay, so that's the demand side. And again now, total revenue is price times quantity. So eventually we'll get to this. We're not doing it right now. It's kind of giving you how much the revenue is. It's not making you figure it out. But when you actually do this for a project, you might actually have to estimate total revenue. Then we have the other side, the law of supply. So this is the producers that are supplying the good or service. So they have a curve that slopes in the other direction, because when the price goes up, they are willing and able to supply more. So they look like this. They slope upward to the right. That's a supply curve. The law of supply says they do. So the higher the price, the more we're willing to provide. Right? So you are willing to provide more if you can sell it for a higher price. I think we all get with that. Sounds reasonable. Now, I didn't say anything that your costs went up. I just simply say the higher the price, the more you're willing to supply. So the opportunity cost of each supplier is represented by this supply curve. So let me get my tools. Okay. So right here, for example, the cost of producing this amount right here is red over here. So this is how much it costs to produce this one right here. And what it tells me is that this one up here, the cost of producing this one is this one right here. So now we've actually linked that supply curve with costs. This is what I'm giving up right here to produce this one right here. So if my price is up here, I made money on this one, because I gave up this much worth of stuff, but I sell it for this much. We gave up this much worth of stuff, but I sell it for this much. So I'm actually making over and above what it cost me to produce this thing. And that's called a transfer of wealth from the consumer, who says, I'm willing to pay, this is the price. And some of that is actually them producing profit for the supplier. So part of this bargain in a market economy is that you accept the fact that the business is going to make a profit. They're going to make over and above the actual cost of what it costs to produce. Okay, and this is why we get frustrated, because we feel like they are taking some of our power, because we don't really think they should make that much money. I hear so many people making judgments about what profits businesses should earn. If you think a business is getting rich at your expense, don't shop there. Vote with your dollars, leave the room. Don't sit there and be mad. Profit is what drives businesses to produce the goods and services that we want to buy. If we don't buy them, those businesses will go away. If we buy it, if we go to Walmart and buy stuff, we're giving them our money in return for those goods, and we're happy about it. So you can't have it both ways. Either you want to consume this stuff or you don't. If you don't, the business will stop and go away. We don't need to get mad. We don't need to be angry. We simply don't shop there, and they will go away. So this is the kind of like the communication mechanism, is this willingness to buy and sell. If we're willing to buy, it says, oh, the price is acceptable. If we're not willing to buy, it could be the price, it could be other things. We don't buy, nothing happens, they go away, they do something else. They use their resources for something else. So we are voting with our willingness to pay to give signals on what we want done. So this is why we love the market mechanism and why we don't like need and these other things. Need. I need it because I need it. Those are very difficult decisions to make, but when you're actually voting with dollars, everybody's in control of their own voting privileges. I can really vote for the stuff I really, really like, and if I really hate it, None of my money goes there. I'm very clear with my signals. Or I can spread around a little bit at a time because it's my money and I can vote how I want to. Very effective. Very effective. It makes decisions for us by communicating this in a way that's very easy to read these signals, and no one has to interpret anything. When you're doing need-based, someone has to get in there and interpret. You're standing in line, someone's got to get in the middle of that and provide those non-market structures for you to stand in line, versus buying online, versus all this controversy with that. The strongest prevail, the dictator decides. There's problems with all those too. But the one that lets the consumer do the most direct voting is this one. And that's why we like it. It creates a very strong bond between the person that wants the good or service and the person supplying it. And that's what we want. We want to be very efficient. And that's why we're talking about economics, because one of the hallmarks of economics is efficiency. We don't want to waste a bunch of time trying to figure out what we want or who needs it. Very expensive. Very expensive. Okay. Also, let me just say that, oh, gosh, I cannot hit that button. Okay. Costs do not determine price necessarily. Right here, I just gave you a price. That's really a function of consumers coming into the picture. So we got a price up here, but the costs are here. They're not directly related. So some of us are conditioned to think, oh, the prices in Safeway or Foodland went up because costs went up. No. No. How much I'm willing to pay for something may not be at all a function of the cost. For some of it, it may be very important, but for some of us, maybe not. So when I go into Safeway, don't just automatically assume that the price went up because costs went up. Not always automatic. Sometimes there is a pricing strategy, the Macy's pricing strategy or the Neiman Marcus pricing strategy versus the Costco. Do you have the cheapest? What else do you have? There's a lot of things that go into this. Price is really, in the end, determined by the customer's willingness to pay. If you're not willing to pay it, it doesn't sell. So you notice when you go to third world countries, bargaining. Why do we love bargaining? Because sellers are able to determine how much we're willing to pay. What's the rule on bargaining? We go to bargain. Any guidebook you read. You go into a shop, they quote you a price. What do you do? Anybody's got strategies? Everybody knows the strategy, right? You take the price they give you and cut it in half and you offer half. Then what do you do? Because then when they're going to be insulted, oh, that's so low, I'm not making any money, I'm going broke, oh. Then what do you do? If you're bargaining, what do you do? Who walks out of the store? Who walks out of the store? Anybody? I walk out of the store. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not interested. And then they will all of a sudden start taking their price down. All good bargainers know this. Price is determined by that customer's willing to pay. And if you're not willing to pay, they will think to themselves, I'm either going to lose a little bit of profit if I don't lower my price, or I'm going to get no profit at all, so I'm going to go for a little bit of profit. Because you don't know what it costs. Only they know what it costs. So this is how you find out. So this is why we love to do bargaining. Some people don't actually. They're willing to pay. I will bargain if it's a significant thing. I remember once I bought something for 25 cents and someone berated me for not bargaining, and I was like, it's 25 cents. She's a mother with a kid. Come on, 25 cents. It's not worth it. I'm not going to bargain. Even though I might have saved 10 cents, not worth it. Okay, so again now, let's conclude where we are. We have the buyers and the sellers coming together, and they're exchanging ownership of something. You give me the money, I give you the good or service. So I don't own it anymore, you own it, and instead I have money. So that's the exchange. The problem is that sometimes weird things go on and that exchange doesn't account for everything. There's some issues. There's two types of issues we're going to talk about. One type of issue we're going to talk about is if the costs and the benefits of buying and selling that good or service are not completely reflected in the demand curve or supply curve. Sometimes there's costs that are not paid by the seller. They're not going to take them into account, but they should. Sometimes there's benefits that the consumer is not going to take into account because they don't get them all. Like if I keep my yard nice, all my neighbors benefit, but they don't have to pay the price. But they love it when my yard is nice. They don't like it when my yard is full of weeds. It's a problem for them. But they're not going to come and dig my weeds out, and they're not going to come and mow their lawn, but they love it when my house looks good. So that's another thing. The benefits are not accurately reflected in the demand curves, right? Because the demand curves really reflect the benefit from consuming that good or service. So when those demand and supply curves are not in the proper places because we are missing something, because it's non-market, it doesn't happen in the market, doesn't buy and sell, then we have a problem because our curves are inaccurate. And we have another problem. We have another problem because certain buyers and certain sellers are able to get power in the marketplace and produce at locations that we're not happy with. We see very clear examples when we're talking about Walmart. Walmart has a lot of power as a buyer. They can force the sellers that they buy from, that sell them goods and services to stock in their stores, to take lower prices, or we won't do business with you. Whole Foods has very strict requirements. If you don't do what we want, we won't do business with you. This is an unequal power situation. Another type of unequal power situation is GMOs. If you have a genetic material from Monsanto or some of these GM modified seeds in your plants, they can sue you. But if you have organic seeds that are not contaminated by GMOs and all of a sudden you get that stuff there but you didn't want it, you can't sue them, but they can sue you. So what's with that? That's not fair. That's not equal. So we have some unequal setups that go on. How about let's talk about my favorite cable provider, Spectrum. Well, there's not a lot of options, right? Cell phones are a lot of options now. It used to be we just have Hawaiian Tel, and that was the only phone we could get. But now we have a lot of options. But T-Mobile and not Verizon, T-Mobile and another company are trying to merge. We're not allowing that. We're thinking about not allowing it. Why are we not allowing it? Because when you merge together those companies, they start to get more power to control things. We call those monopolies, single sellers. There's only one place I can buy cable TV, and that's Spectrum, and I'm not happy, right? So I want more options. Why do we like more options? Because that makes the situation better for us and less power in the hands of the seller. So sometimes in these marketplaces, a buyer or a seller will get undue power, and we don't like that. So those are the two times when we start to see problems with this market thing. Let's go back to what we're doing. Or do we have an equal? No, maybe we need to go for it. Okay. There we go. Okay. Okay, so it was in the next slide. I didn't realize that. Okay, so here's what we want. Where we really want to be is right here, right in the middle. Why do we love that? We love that because here, the value that we placed on that thing is much, much larger than what it cost us to produce it. In fact, it costs us very little. And here, you notice, we still get value from it. We value it in our community at this much, but it only costs us this much to produce it. And we continue to right here, and we want to stop right here because this very last one cost us exactly what we valued it to produce it. So we're just equaling our value with the cost of production. They're just equal right here. And everything before that, we valued it more than it cost us to produce it. So we're really Pareto optimizing, or Pareto preferred position to be moving down because everyone is benefiting. The producers and the consumers are all benefiting, assuming that these cost curves are correct, this is correct and this is correct, then society is actually better off because we're really getting more out of it than we're spending on it. We're getting more well-being, so we're happier. We want it to be produced. And we're going to stop right here because the last one was just equal to what we valued it. If we go to here, then we're saying we valued it this, but it cost us this much. Again, now we want to stop here because that is really the optimal setup. It just is valued at what we cost to produce it, and everyone before that generated a consumer and a producer surplus. The consumers got this much extra, and the sellers got, or the suppliers got this much extra, the sellers, and everybody's better off. So we're happier. But if you go to here, it doesn't work because we value it at this price. So these people down here who didn't get it before are happier, but it cost us this much to produce it, and they only value it this much. So society is not happier. These people may be, but it's not Pareto preferred. Society as a whole is not into this because we're spending more to produce it than these people value it at. Of course, they'd like to have it, and they'll be complainers, but that doesn't mean we should do it. Same with these people. They'd love to be up here, but no. But again, let me just warn you that we have a lot of complainers who have the ability to get heard. So this is what's getting us, right? We have the complainer in chief who's wanting to add tariffs to things. When you add tariffs, that's going to move your supply curves up. Everything's going to cost more. Is that really making us happy? I don't know, but that's what we're talking about. So a tariff is actually a tax, and when you actually start slapping taxes on things, what you're really doing is making things more expensive and making it so that more people can't get stuff. So that's going to cause complainers among the consumers, and you're really going to do what? Is this really a better situation? So you really have to ask yourselves before you start messing in these markets, are you really correcting a broken thing? Remember I said what's broken? Either unequal power situations that prevent us from getting here, and there are situations where you won't be here because either this person or this person has a lot of power and they'll stop before they get to this point, or the costs that are reflected here or the benefits that are reflected here are inaccurate. They don't represent the true costs and benefits that society is bearing or getting from this good or service. So in those two cases, we might want to do what we call corrections, correcting things. The other option is when we have these people that are just flat unhappy and are arguing for a new price just because. I want a higher price because I'm here and I'm not happy. I need a price up here or I can't enter the market. So they'll convince people that. Farmers do this all the time. Oh, we just can't make enough money. Or companies are like, well, we're just not making money. So they want a higher price. When you do that, you artificially give them a price. Like, let's just talk specifically. What thing are we doing that we think people need a higher price? The minimum wage debate. You're simply saying these people deserve to be paid more. That's what you're saying. How are we paying people? We're paying them based on the profits they're generating from the jobs they're doing. So if you say they need to be paid more, you're artificially coming in here and distorting the prices of labor because you think people should make more money. What is going to happen? Do you think? If I just start having to pay people more, what's going to happen? What has happened in Seattle and California? All the low-end restaurants, the marginal restaurants have gone out of business. So now we're not going to have cheap restaurant options. What we're going to have is expensive restaurant options. And the people that are going to get those restaurant jobs are the more experienced people. So people that use these restaurant jobs as starter jobs, which is what I believe they are. I don't think anybody wants to be a waitress in a lower end restaurant for their whole waitress or waiter for their whole life. I'm thinking if they're working at McDonald's, they're going to work up to the manager position, or they're going to get to a higher end restaurant where it's a better job, that they're not going to be at McDonald's their whole life. But what you're going to do is cut off that starter job. And people will not leave that starter job. And some people will face more unemployment because you've artificially said, we are not going to be here. We are going to actually just raise the wage. So we're going to be up here. I think I have one of those. We're going to put the wage at above equilibrium. So we want people to be paid more. Here's now the wage rate. Fewer people are going to get jobs than they did before. A lot of people are going to want to work them, but fewer people are going to get them. So as a result of minimum wage, you are going to generate more unemployment in those markets that have to pay above a minimum wage. So those people employed in those jobs are going to feel pressure to work harder. The experienced will get the job, the inexperienced will not. There will be an unemployment and kind of an equity gap. Where do you get this famous starter job? I don't know, in my day, you got it at McDonald's. So I'm not sure how we're going to reconcile this, but a minimum wage distorts the market because you're really putting it in a situation where it's not here at our magic point. It's up here at a distorting point where you're saying this labor is now really worth this much and this is where we get max benefit in this economy. That's not true. We get max benefit in this economy here. This is not necessarily a Pareto preferred position because the people that are benefiting are this group working at this one salary. There is a tax the rest of us will bear, and it's a distorting tax. We won't say anything because most of us probably are not paying that much, are not eating out that much. The majority of the people that eat at fast food places, are they people with a lot of money? Or they're people that just don't have a lot of money? So the people that are paying this tax are the people that are probably least able to pay it. And so we're not, and don't really understand that this is going on. So this is what we really need to guard against. Solving a problem by interfering with the market, a distortion. So the other option, let's go back. The other option would be that the complainers, the demanders decided, well, we don't like this high price. We want a lower price. So we're going to have a price below equilibrium. This just happened in a market I'm in, the Portland housing market. They just decided they were going to prevent you from increasing your rents. So housing prices, they did that in New York City in the 60s. I just know someone who lived in a rent control apartment for 45 years in New York City. Someone wanted to buy it. So you know what happened? This renter who'd lived there for 40 years, 45 years at this really, really low rent was paid $100,000 to move out of that apartment. They didn't own the apartment. They made a ton of money living there for free for years. Not free, but really low rents, didn't have any rent increase, and had to pay $100,000 for this person to move. And this person was so angry that they couldn't sit there for 4 hours waiting for the plane to come. And I'm like, they're paying you $100,000 to move out of their property. You're a renter. Why do you need, but that's what happened. So this is the same problem. If you put the price below equilibrium, this point is called equilibrium. Supply equals demand. Everything is happy. You come here below equilibrium and you have more people want it than it is available. So if you think you're going to fix housing prices by forcing artificially low prices on the sellers of rental housing units, it's only going to make it worse. And notice we were here. Now we're going to have even less housing. So rent controls, not going to work. Controlling prices at all doesn't really work. Prices are a result of how much we value something and how much it costs us to produce it. That just doesn't work. Artificially coming and dictating prices is only going to make things worse. That's what's going to happen. So what we need to do is think of an alternative route because this thing is causing a distortion, this correction. And why did we do this correction? Because in this case, the buyers weren't happy. Housing is too expensive. In this case, the sellers were unhappy. The people selling their services on the markets, the laborers. Oh, this isn't good enough. But what have they now done? Fewer people are going to have jobs. Is that what we want? I don't know. Do we want more unemployment? I don't know that that is a Pareto preferred position, because you're really not having the ability to compensate. So we've talked about Pareto preferred, so you can see my point. We did it in homework 3. Oh, homework, yes. The homework problems are on the syllabus, so look in your syllabus. Some of you are doing assignment 3, but assignment 3 is from chapter 1, so you're getting off on the wrong numbering. So check that. So anyway, so a price control, let's say if we say the price is here on housings, then you have this cost people will bear. And I think somebody published recently somebody's rent control apartment where the thing was like from the 40s, like no improvements for 80 years of leaking and messes. This is what happens. That's the non-monetary costs that you bear when you have rent controls. Once you start mucking with prices, you will not end up here at our magic point. You will end up in a situation where you will have what we call a shortage. You will not have enough to go around. That's a problem. Okay, so you don't need to know this. Okay, again, equilibrium is what we're shooting for, but we can only reach that if these demand curves and supply curves really reflect what's going on, really include the true costs and benefits. And secondly, when no one has the power to prevent us from getting there. When someone has the power to prevent us from getting there, if we come in and try and correct that power, like for example, we control certain utility rates because there's only one utility buyer. If you don't buy it from Hawaiian Electric, you don't buy it. Then we have to come control what they can and cannot allow. This is why we started to allow Tesla battery backups and all this sort of stuff, because people wanted lower utility rates. And the only way they could do it would be install their own power generators. So we were able to break a monopoly, and now we have a little bit more flexibility. So we really like that. And it helps us get to a better place that is closer to equilibrium. I'm not sure we're at equilibrium, but we're closer to it, so it's Pareto preferred. Okay, so again, let's review a shadow price. What is this? Never heard of it. Okay, it's really referring to what it costs us to produce it. So right here, the shadow price of producing this right here is this. Right? For this quantity right here, this is the cost it's to produce it. Now, we may sell it for this, but the actual cost to society of what we use up is right here, and that's what we're concerned about. If we do a project and all of a sudden we have a bigger supply of something, we want to value it. Should we value it at equilibrium if we're going to increase production? Because we are already at equilibrium. How do we value this new production? How do we try and look at, oh, we're going to be able to do 3 times more with the same road because we've improved it? How do we value that? Well, sometimes it's hard because either there isn't a market or the market curves aren't accurate. So this is why we want to go to a shadow price, where we're actually trying to look at the value of one more unit. One more unit. How much more does society value one more house here? How much is one more house? Should we build more houses? Should we switch land from agriculture to housing? Is that what we should do? Because we've got the highest homeless problem in the nation, the biggest homeless problem. What do we do? They can't pay for it, so we can't ask the private suppliers to provide it. So we've got to provide it from public projects. How do we value that housing? At market price? How do we actually value it? And how much it costs us to construct it? That might actually be a better price, but even then, The land is what's so expensive here. And construction costs are pretty pricey in Hawaii. So how are we actually valuing this new housing? Do we value it how much the people say it is? It's wonderful. How much they're able to pay? How do we actually do this when we're trying to mess with these things? So that's one problem we're going to have. The next problem we're going to have is really this kind of thing where the cost curves are not accurate. And I kind of talked about this before. So when a cost curve is not accurate, it can be a positive thing where someone else's benefits are improved because I did something. If I keep care of my lawn, everybody in the neighborhood is happier because the neighborhood looks better. They didn't do any of the work, but they get the benefits. So they would like good lawns. So in this case, the situation looks like this. Here's the original demand in a private market. So I'm not going to pay for it, but I love it. But here's really the benefits of to society. So what happens is that you have a benefit that cannot be bought and sold, so people don't buy and sell. Like I can't charge my neighbors if I mow my lawn. I'd love it, the concept of it. Or if I mow my lawn, you'll pay me, and then because the neighborhood will look better. They're not going to do that. But I'd love it if they did. So what you have is a situation where the society's demand for a good or service is really greater than the private demand, and there's a divergence. And what we'd like to do is move this up to there, right? And then we would be back to happy. But with this diversion, what's going to happen is there's going to be stuff that is not going to happen out there because no one is willing to bear the cost. Let's go back to the lawn example. So I have a lawn, everybody wants me to take care of it. And in some states, you can actually get fined if you don't take care of your lawn. You don't mow your lawn, you can get fined. That actually is a correcting tax that will shift this curve up to there by forcing people to take care of those lawns. You got junk in your yard, we can fine you. So that actually will move this back up to here. A correcting tax. I will fine you for the junk in your yard. That happens, actually. Barking dogs. We will fine you for the noise problem. That will then, because, there's benefits of having dogs, but, there's a problem if you don't take care of them. So that will move the curves back together, although that's a negative externality if they're barking. So there's another type, which is a negative action. So what it says is the private supplier is, and most of this is pollution, the private supplier is not bearing the true costs of their production. So that means these two curves are breaking up. And what you want to do is take this one and move it this way. So you want to go, let me draw. So you want to go this way, right? You want to move this way. So you want to move this back up there. And how do we normally do that? Through taxes. Through taxes. So the junk thing, we're going to tax you. The dog barking, we're going to tax you. The creation of pollution, we're going to tax you. So how do we get this supplier to really see that their curve is up here? Through some sort of tax. Through some sort of tax. Also, let me just say, oh, I can't do that. No. Okay, I don't know why it's, okay, so let's eraser this. Also, for this case, a lot of times you will want to provide some sort of incentive. Usually this isn't a tax, it's an incentive. So if you take care of your lawn, we might give you an incentive. Usually with the negative externality, it's a tax. So in order to move this up to here, there's usually some sort of tax. And I think it makes sense. You're taxing the people who buy the good or service that caused pollution. So if I'm producing Hummers, for example, they're very gas guzzling. Let's tax those because they're gas guzzlers. And then the people that drive the Hummers will pay. Let's tax gasoline. The people that use the gas will pay for the pollution the gas causes. If I'm not buying gas, then I shouldn't be accountable for that pollution. So we're really trying to, what I call, internalize it. So a lot of times you will get taxes connected here. Those will be correcting taxes. So in your homework on this thing, it's all about how do you correct it to account for these things. Is it a correct tax like this where you should be taxing, or is it one of those taxes where someone here or here didn't like it, so they wanted us to charge more or charge less? That is distorting. That makes everything even worse off. In this case, what we're trying to do is correct it by bringing this curve to be on top of that curve once again, because they've separated, because somehow we're not charging for everything. So that's what they're talking about. Generally in this class, because it's NREM, we're talking about pollution and we're talking about taxing in order to deal with the problem. And there's another great benefit, and I think we see this when we travel in Europe. Europe never had gas. They always had a very high tax for gas because they didn't want people using gas, because they didn't want cars. So they discouraged this starting in the 50s when cars became very popular by charging huge gas taxes. And then they had another benefit. They had all this tax dollars, so they built great public transportation to take care of the poor people with need. They had need, they couldn't pay the gas tax. So now they have a great public transportation system. What did America do? Build the interstate system and everybody's into cars. Really poor bus service, really poor train service. Didn't really have a good public transportation system. And now every time we want to raise the gas tax, because gas pollution is driving us to the brink of destruction, the poor people complain because they have no other way to get to the office. And who's driving all the old vehicles that use tons of gas? Poor people, because they don't have any money. So again, if we correct with projects that will correct and mechanisms that will correct, then things are better off. But sometimes we do things that don't make us better off, and those are distorting. So again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to be as efficient and as effective as possible by getting rid of situations where the demand and supply curve do not represent true net benefits or true costs. Or if we have a situation of unequal power, of which we do have a lot in some markets, if you're correcting that situation, we really like to be at equilibrium. And sometimes if you have power in a market, you will stop before equilibrium, because that's when you make the most money. When you go to equilibrium, you do not make the most money. So we really like to be at equilibrium because it equally shares the benefits between the consumer and the producer. If we stop before equilibrium, the producer gets a larger share. So that's why we don't like to stop before equilibrium. We like to be right on equilibrium. So we're in a market that can't go to equilibrium because someone has a bunch of power in that marketplace. We try to take that power away. So that would be correcting. We will not be talking much about equity until we get to distributional effects. That really requires a tracer. In this class, I don't talk about it in a general sense because we're really economists, and I don't usually get that far into it. But when you read your book, it's a bit confusing. But if you go to the FAQ, I literally tell you how to get through this homework and assignment, and you can do this. I literally give you the information. And the reason why it's so complicated is because you don't understand what's a distorting and what's a correcting. Correcting, again, is for externalities and for unequal power structures, because we love equal power structures where supply and demand will come together right on equilibrium because neither group has more power than the other. However, complainers convince people of a lot of things, and we get a lot of distortions. I mean, look at Trump. I know that he believes that he's right, that he's doing the right thing. I don't think he necessarily is with all these distorting taxes he wants to put out there. And it's falling unequally, for example, the China thing on farmers. They are being hurt very badly because China imports a lot of our food. So all this row with China is really reducing our agricultural exports. This is hurting one group specifically. They're very much hurting. This is a group that can't really afford to hurt. And he is not stopping. So it's distorting, it's unfair, but it's not stopping. And I know that he believes he's right. So equity situations are hard to conclude, but the efficiency of it tells you that we now have these farmers that have no place to sell their stuff that were actually making money before, and we're going to have to support them. So this is getting expensive. So that's kind of what our problem is. And I think this is the last slide. All right. So let's stop our share. And we're at the hour. Does anybody have, oh, I have a chat.
Yeah. That was from me earlier.
Oh, you're going to stand your ground.
I was going to say I'm going to break out my book on negotiation from Trump.
Does he negotiate?
No, he has tantrums.
Although I must say that I have to really take my hat off to the Mexican government and the Mexican people for being so patient with us with this last row, because I noticed that we settled that. I think that they extended us a lot of aloha, and we came to a negotiation and we solved the problem. So I am very appreciative of their willingness to get through this as he insults them repeatedly to their faces.
I agree.
So I am very proud of them, and I have to give them a shout out, because it must be very difficult to be dealing with this, because some of this, of course, is not their fault that people from other countries traverse Mexico to get to the border. And for those of you who've never lived in a nation, I'm sure there's many of us who've never lived in a nation where one is fearing for one's life on a daily basis. I can totally understand where someone would be willing to risk everything to try and get a better situation where they're not dealing with that every day. And if one has to troop across Mexico, I can see where one might be willing to do that, and that the Mexicans would not see this as a bad thing. So enough politician talk, but again, this is kind of what we're facing. And I guess he thinks he's got the power to do this. And, you know, in some ways he kind of does, right? He does a lot of threatening on that he has the power to do certain things. So, you know, again, for markets, this uncertainty and this kind of stuff that's not really correcting, but really distorting everything is not good. That's why the markets are jumping all around. They like stability and they don't like distortions. They like, this is what the deal is. Here's what it's worth to us. Here's what it costs. And we want to get to equilibrium. This is really what makes us happiest. And when we don't get to equilibrium, we really need to take a look at it on how to actually get there efficiently and effectively, and not make a bad situation worse by caving into complainers. So there's my parting message. Anyone has questions? Okay, and I'm really going to try and get these YouTubes working this week, because I know everyone's getting sick of bugging me to email them. I will email them to you, of course, but I think it's probably, now that almost everyone is kicked in gear, I think you could go find them for yourself. They're all dated in sequence, so they should kind of correspond to the syllabus. So now this is chapter 5. That is going to be difficult, so I'm ready to have questions on that. And I'm also going to be posting next week kind of a little overview of what a BCA kind of presentation looks like, so you can kind of get a feel for what that looks like. And then I'm going to finish up the graduate course and keep posting. So, and I also changed my trip to China. I was going to be gone 3 weeks. That's just not doable. So I'm only going to be gone 1 week. I've been to China. This is my 6th time. So I'm feeling like, okay, I need to sit with this class. So I'm going to only go for a week. The 9th through the 16th, I'm scheduled to be gone. And other than that, I'll be around. So that will solve our problem with submissions and questions, because if I was in China, it would be very difficult for us all to communicate because of this authentication system where I have to not only give a password, but I also have to be on my phone. If I'm not in my office, they call me all the time, and that's not going to work in China. So there we are. We're going to kind of take a break around the 4th of July for you to get caught up. But other than that, I'm going to just keep zooming along. Okay, everybody. See you later.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.